Welcome back to our study called My Foot Slips. This is part 2. And today we're asking the question, do we trust enough? And we're looking at Genesis 16, 1 through 2 today. Let's first start with the Egyptian here. We first start our story with the reminder that Sarai is still barren. Moses has really let us know this. I mean, he's been clear to us that every physical means of having a child has been denied to Sarah. He's made it very clear there's no indication she'd be able to have any children. So, if she were to become pregnant, we know that this must happen by supernatural intervention. Nothing natural is going to cause that. We also have in verse 1 the introduction of Hagar. We're told that she is an Egyptian servant. She was probably one of those servants mentioned back when Sarai was taken into Pharaoh's house. And remember that Abram was given servants in return for Sarai. So that's probably where you got Hagar from. The important thing to notice here is how Moses refers to her. In verse 1, she is a female Egyptian servant. In verse 3, she is the Egyptian, her servant. Again, repetition is important here. Here we have Moses connecting the dots for us. He twice mentions Egypt, which connects us back to Abram's sojourning in Egypt and the rebuke by Pharaoh. Okay? Abram did what he wasn't supposed to do. He got rebuked. And so Moses is connecting this back. And it takes us further back to really to chapter 10, where we saw that one of Ham's sons was Egypt. So it also connects us forward in the story to Jacob's sojourning in Egypt as well and his children's oppression by the Egyptians. It connects us to Moses' story and the ultimate defeat of Pharaoh. So Egypt should bring to our minds mixed thoughts as we move ahead in the story. When we think about the fact that he keeps mentioning that she's an Egyptian, she's the Egyptian servant. That should, okay, why is he telling us this? It's not really a key thing in the story, but it is in order to connect the whole story together. So it's a very good idea, a very good way to connect the story of Abram to what else is going on in this book. All right, so that's the Egyptian. Now let's look at the plan. What's the plan here? Well, this brings us to verse 2. So first, Sarah recognizes the sovereignty of God in her situation. She knows that the Lord has prevented her from bearing children. They have been waiting 10 years since being in the land of Canaan, and nothing's happened yet. So Sarai comes up with a plan to give the covenant promises a little push. She tells Abram that he should take Hagar as a concubine and thereby have children. Though this might sound foreign to us, it might sound to a lot of women, it sounds offensive. And we know from history that this was a common practice in the culture at the time. If a woman could not have a child, she could give her maidservant to her husband, and any children that would result from that couple would belong to the wife, not the servant. So the servant wouldn't have children. It wouldn't be her child. It would actually be the wife's child. So this was a common practice, a common cultural practice. We know that this goes against the laws of God, right? Even though it's cultural, it doesn't mean it's good. It was God who made Adam and Eve. The two shall become one, not the three shall become or four shall become one. He said two shall become one. Paul comments on this story in Galatians 4. He says in verse 29 that this plan was according to the flesh, not according to the spirit. So this whole scheme that they have was concocted by the will of man, not the will of God. This story then stands as a testimony to the sovereignty of God. Abram and Sarai testify that God is in control, but God is delayed in the fulfilling of his promises. The question then is, do they have the trust enough to wait on God? They trust him enough not to start buying up property, and they're not going out warring against other people, they're not killing the Amorites and taking over their land. But do they trust him enough to wait on children? That's really the question here. Do they trust him enough to wait on children? Well, we get to the next part, and this is the concession here. There's a concession here, and it's by Abram. So there's one final note I want to put on this section, is in verse 2, ends with, Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. These two verses should seem familiar, right, to us, because they are framed in the same way. They're set up the same way as the interchange between Adam and Eve. Many of the same phrases that Moses used with Eve, taking the fruit and giving it to Adam, and then Adam listens to the voice of his wife, Eve, are the same ones that Moses uses for Abram and Sarai here. So, are we getting the hint here? I think we should, from Moses, that he's tying these stories again back to Adam. Look what happened with Adam. Listen to the voice of Sarai. He didn't stand up to her. He didn't say, no, this is not what God said. He didn't lead his wife in the way she should go. He didn't help his wife. He just conceded. He just gave up. He said, oh, well, yeah, whatever, sure. I guess that's a good plan. And that's what Adam did with Eve. Adam could have helped Eve, but he doesn't. He gives in. What does Abram do to Sarai? Doesn't help her out. He just gives in. So that should be a lesson. So the question is, do they have enough trust? Do they trust enough in God? You trust some, but is it enough? And that's the question that Abram and Sarai were going to have to ask themselves, and really God is pushing that question upon them. Do you trust me enough? Do you really trust me? And you trust me a little. You trust me in some things, but do you trust me in everything? And that's the question that they had before them.